Today on Inside Utah Politics, dignity over contempt in politics, a pilot program in Utah trying to promote just that. How the Dignity Index works and what it's finding in our congressional races. Plus, the balance of power in the Senate. We're looking at the closest races in the country, including right here at home.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with the Dignity Index. Jesse Graham and Tammy Pfeiffer are here to explain what it is and how it works. So glad to have both of you here. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, let's get into the background. Tammy, we'll start with you on that. How did the Dignity Index come about?
Well, thanks, Glenn. It's just a pleasure to be here. And about 2.5 years ago, when I left the governor's office, I started working with a national nonprofit called Unite. And our goal was to ease the divisions in the country, the toxic political divides. A lot of people are working on that, as you know. But as we started studying this issue, we realized that our divisions are not caused by disagreements. They're not caused because we're different from each other. They're caused by contempt. And it all boiled down to the contempt that we hold for people. And in politics, as you know, the contempt can really be toxic. And so we started to develop a way to look at contempt. And the antidote to contempt, we believe, is dignity. And we believe that you can't solve a problem if you can't name it and define it and measure it. And so we came up with the Dignity Index, where we have named, defined, and are attempting to measure the contempt, especially in political language.
A lot of people will take that statement and wonder, is it possible to eliminate contempt in the current political environment? Jesse, answer that question.
I think it's very, very difficult to completely eliminate it, but we're hoping to, with this project, at least reduce it. And, you know, if you want to fix something, you need to be able to measure it. And so we've been trying to develop this as a measure that we can systematically apply to political speech.
Tammy, before we get into some of the application that has come out in the recent weeks, talk about how it works. What are you looking at and how are you judging here?
So we are looking specifically at language and at speech. We are not grading or scoring candidates or people, but we are looking at the language used. The language that we use can lead to division at the top of the list, but if you can go down further, it can lead to violence. And it's been shown throughout history how the language that we use to dehumanize others can lead to violence. And so we're looking specifically at the language. We applied the index. If you go on our website, dignityindex.us, you can see the scorecard. And it can show you what language at a 1, which is the bottom of the scale, looks like, versus language at the top of the scale, an 8 looks like. So 1 to 4, that's the area that we're speaking with contempt, the language of contempt. And from 5 to 8 is the language of dignity, and where we speak and use words and phrases that indicate dignity for others.
Okay, let's look at the application here and actually dig into some examples. This is a campaign email that came out from independent candidate Evan McMullen in the race for Senate. He says, Senator Lee refused to accept responsibility for trying to overturn our last election and override the will of the people. This scored a 3 on the Dignity Index. Talk about why.
Yeah, so the reason that this got a 3, you know, I think of 4 as the start of contempt, and that's where you were starting to denigrate the other side. You think that they're incompetent, maybe not doing a good job. But at a 3, you're really getting into accusations of bad character. So things like dishonesty, they're doing bad things. And so any time that somebody is starting to impute bad character, that's at least a 3 on the scale.
Okay, so how could that have come out and got a higher score on the Dignity Index?
Yeah, and we think it's entirely possible to strongly disagree with someone while still treating them with dignity. You can talk about the policies that you disagree with, the actions that the other person has taken without name calling, without necessarily implying bad character or saying that the other side is stupid or evil. You can still do that with dignity.
Okay, now let's take a look at a campaign email from Senator Lee's campaign. And I should point out that these both came out shortly after the debate on Monday. This one says, America cannot afford to allow Democrats to hold their majority and continue their destructive agenda. Once again, this is rated as a 3. Tammy, explain why.
So again, when you get down into the contempt side of the scale, you're saying we're the good people and you're the bad people. And we're responsible for all the good things happening and you're responsible for all the bad things happening. One of the interesting things with contempt is that it encourages, it's not just you showing contempt, but you're encouraging contempt from a lot of people. So those that are sympathetic are going to show contempt for the same person you're showing contempt for, and those that are not sympathetic are going to start showing contempt for you. So in reality, it can backfire in a big way. But this is a case of I'm the good person, you're the bad person.
Okay, I don't work on a campaign, and I haven't talked to these specific campaigns about this, but I can imagine they're listening to this and saying, well, what else are we supposed to do? We need to differentiate our candidate from the other. We need to hold the other candidate accountable. What else can we do?
Yeah, and again, I think they can disagree, they can talk about policy without name-calling, without imputing bad character to the other side. You know, one of the things we found when we were scoring the debates is it was pretty easy for us to find examples of both dignity and contempt from every single candidate who debated. I would say the Senate debate was a little more contemptuous in general. There were a lot more examples of contempt, but I think this is something that everybody is capable of. When we look at fundraising emails and third-party ads, there it's very hard for us to find any dignity. It's just contempt, 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 you know, because I think that's the strategy when they're trying to raise money.
Yeah, I did want to bring up the PAC spending. We're seeing a ton of it in the Senate race, and you answered the question that I was going to ask. Is there any dignity that we're seeing at all in any of those?
I think one of them got a score of a 5, but it was, you know, 2s, 3s, 4s, all across the board.
Okay, I would say that from what I've seen from the scoring, it probably ranges between 3 and 6 for the most part. Tammy, talk about the overall view of our congressional races in Utah and what you're seeing from the standpoint of dignity.
What's interesting is we're looking at this as dignity as a problem-solving tactic. So when we look at the language coming from our candidates, we have to look to see how able are you going to be as my elected official to solve problems? Is the language that you're using, is it contemptuous or does it have dignity? When you get into office or continue in office, will you be able to solve problems? And I think when we watch some of the debates, it gets a little bit interesting because you're saying if you hate the Democrats or Republicans now, what will it be like when you get into office? And I think that's the lens that we need to look through.
So you mentioned the Senate as being the most contemptuous race here in the state of Utah. Which one would you say falls on the other end of that you've seen the most dignity?
Really, all the congressional debates I saw, I was pretty startled at how much dignity there was. There was a lot of examples of candidates talking about where they agreed with the other side, saying good things about the opposing party. And so overall, I would say a lot of these races are fairly dignified. Again, you know, the Senate race, you have more examples of contempt, but we also found examples of dignity there too. So it's not that, you know, we're saying all politics is contemptuous. We're just trying to point out when it's dignified and when it's not.
And I'd like to add, because it kind of goes along with that point, I've covered politics in other states, and things are mild here in the state of Utah compared to what I've seen elsewhere. Tammy, what are the next steps? This is a pilot project. Where does it go from here?
So this is a pilot project. We're taking what we learn here. We've got great partners with University of Utah, with Jesse Graham and his team, with the Hinckley Institute of Politics, and our board of advisors here in Utah are fantastic. We want to take what we learn and then see how we can apply, maybe refine and find other applications for the index on a national stage and move this to a national project. Okay.
You already mentioned this, but let's do it one more time for all our viewers that would be interested in going and checking out your work and looking into it in greater detail.
So go to dignityindex.us and you'll see our scoring system, and it would be fun to, if you take a look through it, if you're like I am, I go through it and think, I think I said something like that the other day and I could have been a 4. So.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I've done the same thing.
Right.
All right, so interesting. We'll see how this works out and where it goes. We really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks.
Still to come, the race for U.S. Senate. We've already talked about it. Senator Mike Lee and challenger Evan McMullin facing off for the one and only time ahead of the midterms. Our panel will be weighing in on their performance a little later. But first, a Senate investigation finding dangerous conditions in military housing. What lawmakers and advocates are calling for after the break. One of the biggest issues to be decided in the midterms is what party will control the U.S. Senate. And with only days left, it's a toss-up. Washington correspondent Alexander Lamont reports on some of the most closely watched Senate races, including one right here in Utah.
Some of the country's closest Senate races include contests in Georgia and Pennsylvania. But perhaps one of the most surprisingly close races is the one in Utah.
You used to agree with me that Roe versus Wade was really wrong.
Jason Perry with the University of Utah's Hinckley Institute of Politics says Republican Senator Mike Lee only holds a 4-point lead over independent Evan McMullin.
And we have 12% of Utahns who say they don't yet know who they're going to vote for.
Traditionally, Utah is solidly Republican, and McMullin promises to be a true independent.
Democrats are supporting him. He is their candidate. And that is also the very point that Senator Mike Lee is trying to exploit.
But that may be a hard sell.
In 2016, as you recall, you voted for me.
Democrats hope the issue of abortion will help their Senate candidates in states like Ohio and North Carolina. In Iowa, polls show it's an unexpectedly tight race. But Naveen Nayak with the Center for American Progress says he takes that polling with a grain of salt.
The reality is if Democrats are winning those seats, it's going to be a really good night for Democrats.
And he says the economy is the issue that will likely hurt Democrats and could cost Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto her seat.
The economic challenges around inflation are very real for people in that state.
Republicans only need one more seat than they currently hold to win control of the Senate. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Lawmakers want to confront the dangerous conditions they found in some military homes. A new bill aims to address the issues that service members and their families have been living with. Washington correspondent Hannah Brent explains how.
Military service members expect to face danger, but not inside their own homes.
So it's quite frankly a national security issue. We have to have a safe place for our military service members and their families so they can focus on operations of protecting our country.
Kate Needham with Armed Forces Housing Advocates fights for military families plagued by unsafe living conditions, including toxic mold, water leaks, and hazardous damage. And a recent Senate investigation led by Senators John Ossoff and Ron Johnson found a pattern of those unsafe issues in privatized military homes.
Our service members and military families already make huge sacrifices. They should not have to sacrifice a safe and healthy home.
Now, Senator Ossoff and advocates are part of a push to pass legislation to create a military housing council to address the problems.
We can't keep screaming into the void. So this is going to give families a really black and white solution, hopefully, to what's been going on.
The council would be made up of service members and housing experts that would gather complaints, track abuses, and report findings to Congress and the Defense Department.
Transparency and oversight are critical. A lack of accountability has been one of the key drivers of this crisis.
The legislation has support from both parties.
This is a nonpartisan piece of legislation in our opinion. This is simply to protect military service members and their families.
And Needham is hopeful it will pass soon.
Military families aren't asking for more than what civilian families have. They just want to be treated equitably and with respect.
In Washington, I'm Hannah Brand.
Candidates for U.S. Senate don't hold back as they square off on the debate stage for the only time ahead of the election. Our panel weighs in on the race after the break. Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Salt Lake Tribune columnist Michelle Quist and State Representative Jen Daly-Provo. I really appreciate both of you being here this morning.
Good to be here.
Let's start off with the Senate debate. On Monday, neither candidate holding back any punches, and this thing was talked about all across the country. Michelle, let's start with you. How do you evaluate the performance of the two candidates?
Yes, it was very fiery, and the national news loved it. I think it was kind of catty and unattractive at times when they would, when there was a lot of talking about the other person's response and seeking civility and asking for demanding apologies rather than answering the questions. And I'm not sure that that's what Utah voters need in order to decide, you know, who they want to vote for. It helps to reinforce those who already know, but the question is those who don't know yet, and that's the audience that, you know, you want to try to reach in a debate like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. But first, Representative, your thoughts on the candidates and how they performed Monday night?
So it's always sad to watch politics as public theater instead of really get to the issues that hit home for Utah families and families around the country, and how our candidates really want to seek to solve those problems. And you know, I think that benefit of the doubt, most candidates really go into these with their talking points, hoping to really resonate on issues that families care about, but it tends to devolve into you know, bumper sticker politics. Who can say the most catchy thing that can be captured in a tweet? And I'm anxious, looking forward to the day when we can return to debates that are substantive and really answer the questions that voters want answers to.
Let's go into the undecided voter a little bit more, Michelle. If you're an undecided voter going into that debate, do you have any answers coming out of it?
I'm not sure. In the case of Senator Lee, an undecided voter would want an answer for his texts, right, about the January 6th and about the election. And I mean, even CNN said that, you know, Senator Lee's answers on this were not forthright and you know, kind of tried to rewrite history. So that wouldn't help them for Senator Lee. For Evan McMullin, the question is, where exactly does he stand and where will he vote on these issues? And, you know, on the important issues, he really didn't, his positions weren't much different than Senator Lee's, and it's still unclear where he would be, other than that he would be alone on his own and people might come to him, you know, to answer questions. That's his theory. And so as an undecided voter, you know, seeking, you know, who aligns with my values, I'm not sure the debate was helpful at all.
Representative, your thoughts on the undecided voter? Did any one candidate win over an undecided voter on that night?
I think it depends on what issues are most salient to them. You know, if the issue is the January 6th riots, then I agree with Michelle. I think that didn't offer a lot of clarity, but you know, if your issue is how are you going to vote to help seniors get affordable medications, then the answer is pretty clear. And so I would say it's a mixed bag, but at the end of the day, I don't think there are a lot of undecided voters.
In this race, from the very beginning, we've seen a clear strategy from both campaigns. Evan McMullin's campaign trying as much as they can to tie Senator Lee to the former president, Donald Trump. The term that was used in the debate was bootlicker. And we have seen Senator Lee's campaign really try to tie Evan McMullin to the Democratic Party and to President Biden. The term there was opportunistic gadfly. Two interesting terms we heard come out of the debate there. Is that strategy really working, and is that what voters want to hear, Michelle?
With that, I would agree with Jen that, you know, it helps those voters who already know how they're going to decide, but it puts off voters who are authentically looking for somebody who aligns with their values, you know, who they haven't identified yet. I think that there was an opportunity, perhaps a missed opportunity, to maturely show that, you know, that values align. And Senator Lee's message was, if you want to get anything done, we need a Republican majority in the Senate. And Evan McMullin's message was, if you want to get anything done, we need to be bipartisan. So I guess in that respect, you know, whichever message aligns with your values is who you would probably, you know, align with for this election.
Representative, your thoughts on these strategies that we've seen deployed by the campaigns?
Well, I think practically, if we're talking about Washington, D.C. and all of its dysfunction, if Utah truly wants a seat at the table and a voice heard, then we need a candidate that's being wooed and recruited by both parties. And with a Senate that is as evenly split as it is, you know, having that candidate that both parties really want to work with, who will work with both parties, and I think the clear choice is Evan McMullin. But I don't know to what extent voters actually want Utah to have a really influential voice more than they want to divide into political divides.
How do you see this race at this point? Representative, you say you don't think there are a lot of undecideds. Michelle, what is your thought? And specifically what I'd like to hear from you as we hear Evan McMullin talk about this coalition of Republicans, moderates, and Democrats. In the end, are Republicans really going to vote for Evan McMullin?
I think there are undecideds, especially moderates in the state. And I think the June decision on Roe v. Wade kind of made a lot of Republicans, especially Republican women, stop a bit and wonder whether this was not the time to vote party or not. And so I think that, you know, it makes sense for them to value those messages and listen to the messages. And I think moderates are still deciding. It'll be interesting as the early votes come in to see where those numbers are.
You bring up a point that I'm really interested in, because you talk about how Republican women may be stepping back and viewing this. In 2016, when he was running for president, Evan McMullin said he believed Roe should be overturned. Now he's not saying that. So how is that playing with that demographic?
I think that message is not out there as much. I think his current message that it's a state rights issue is you know, safe with Republican voters. But again, Republican women and women across the board, and you know, I'm not counting out Republican men that might value personal liberty for women and concerns about you know, state mandated pregnancies, reconsidering their positions based on a fear of what a Republican majority might do.
Representative, where do you see the race as we head into the final stretch?
You know, I think that the political pundits and all of the polls and the talking points really don't take enough into account how much people really care about the fact that voting record matters, that we're watching our elected officials and we're watching our senator vote against protecting veterans, and we're voting against making sure that working mothers have access to high quality health care, and voting against seniors getting access to affordable medications. And you know, I think that we get too caught up in the high level, you know, these really partisan issues. And that's not to say that the debate on reproductive rights is not extremely salient and one of the most critical issues that we're dealing with right now. But I think that, I really think that those, you know, those issues of voting records and the ability to really claim whether or not you're a public servant for our state is already playing into what people have decided. And I'm optimistic for the Senate race.
Okay, we have about a minute left, so 30 seconds each. I just want to touch real quick on this issue we're seeing play out across the country. You know, a lot is at stake here, and so we're really seeing Republicans go out and hitting the economy and inflation hard. Historically, that has been really on the top of mind of voters, but we have this new dynamic that both of you have alluded to this year in the Roe decision and reproductive rights. Which one has the winning message heading down the stretch? Michelle?
Yeah, 6 months ago it was a referendum on President Biden. In June, that kind of swayed a bit, you know, depending on where you were on Roe v. Wade. It seems to be turning back a bit with Republican messaging on crime and on inflation. I still think, you know, obviously it depends on if the Republican Party can hold Pennsylvania and perhaps gain in Nevada or elsewhere. But I think it's a very personal decision and it's hard to call. I think the one thing is that it's not party specific now and people are really identifying these issues for themselves.
Okay, we only have like 10 to 15 seconds left. Representative, your final thoughts.
You know, I agree with Michelle. I think that it comes down to what impacts families the most, and as you know, many of us are parents, and what we feel is going to lead to a better future for our children.
Okay.
And it's personal.
All right, appreciate both of your perspective. Very interesting conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with more Inside Utah Politics. We leave now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The voter registration deadline for the midterm election is Friday. After that, you can register in person at the polls. The last day to request a mail-in ballot is Tuesday, November 1st. Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.